So thanks very much for being with us. A pleasure interviewing you. Welcome to India from Delhi to Mumbai. You've really been switching cities. But all along, the narrative about India, as far as you are concerned, is it's a bright spot in an otherwise cloudy global horizon. What makes you so optimistic about India? You're here. This is your first visit ever since the new government has taken over. Have things really changed? Is there a sense of optimism that you're feeling in India that's now for real? Have you seen it for yourself?
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be back in India. I've said all along in the last 3 days, India is the bright spot, and I've also said seize the moment. Now is the time to really take advantage of a set of circumstances that are very favorable to India. The first one is clearly the decline in the price of oil, which has been a super booster to the Indian economy. We've done a study to see which economies were most beneficiaries of the oil price decline. India comes top of the list.
That's right.
So that has been a great benefit. But it's not the only thing. Whether it's the policies that have been voted, that are being developed, that will be implemented, whether it's the announcement of policies in all sorts of domains, that has created a momentum, an appetite for India, an interest for India, confidence in India, and those are the reasons why I think that there is some magic at the moment that needs to be seized in order to develop further. And we are seeing it in numbers. When we have this horizon of 3.5% growth in 2015, 3.7% forecast for 2016, to have a country that we see at 7.5% and a bit more next year is definitely a bright number compared with others.
You have for a reason said this is India's moment to seize, and which is why you've tempted me to my next question, which really is, do you believe enough reforms have been done, or is there more appetite for bolder reforms given how this government has really been voted into power? They're in absolute control. Do you expect more such bold reforms to be taken forward, and which ones would those be?
I think the reforms that have taken place already are bold, and what is going to be critically important is resilient implementation.
That's right.
Implementation is going to be key. So before you jump to yet more reforms, bolder reforms going forward, I would say implement the bold reforms that have been decided. Develop them through the process. There is a land reform that is underway that hopefully will be seen through the parliamentarian process and will be a significant change. There has been significant reforms in financial inclusions that will operate as a booster for the self-employed, for the small business activity. There is clearly in the budget a determination to invest in infrastructure, which is good because public investment to begin with might be of great help at the moment. There is clearly a determination also to reduce corporate tax in order to incentivize business, and that clearly also is important. And with that background, to have some macroeconomic framework that aims at reducing deficit and keeping some discipline in public finance while devolving to the state level a lot of finance is pretty good, and it's pretty full.
You know, you've worn many hats in the past, and you've been a finance minister yourself. How easy or difficult is it to balance fiscal discipline vis-a-vis a will to boost growth? Because boosting growth in present circumstances does mean letting fisc slip a little, letting fiscal deficit widen a little. Should India do that in the quest of growth? They've decided to do that, but do you fear the factor that India could risk losing its fiscal credibility if it does not meet the targets in the time it has committed to meet them in?
First of all, it's much easier to reduce your fiscal deficit when you have growth in the range of 7.5%. Yes. Everything is much easier with growth. Reduce deficit, create employment. And India has the benefit of a significant growth rate at the moment. Right. Second, it's important to anchor fiscal discipline in the medium term and to stick to it. Right. So to go from 4.1% to 3.9% central fiscal deficit is okay, provided that the fiscal space that is used for investment purposes, for infrastructure projects, which is so much needed in this country, as long as the medium-term anchor is solid and credible.
You mentioned oil right in the beginning. I have one final question to ask on India before I steer this entire discussion to macroeconomy at a global scale. India is an outlier of sorts as far as inflation is concerned. The world is still battling deflationary concerns. Our battle against inflation seems to have largely been won on low crude oil prices, but oil, both you and I know, is an imponderable. Are we a little too smugged? Are we celebrating a little too early, because you never know what happens with oil prices going forward?
Well, you know, when you go from almost 11% down to 5-ish% inflation rate, I think there is plenty to celebrate. But I see more that significant reduction as a tool for other things, particularly for monetary policy purposes. It's clearly helpful, and it is kicking growth in India and should be taken advantage of. You're right that, you know, portion at least of the inflation in India is driven by external factors such as the price of oil. But hey, when the price of oil is down, might as well take advantage of it. And if it affects inflation and reduces it for the benefit of growth and stable monetary policy, the better. And the word is coming from one of the most powerful names in finance, so should be paid a lot of heed to. I want to turn focus to something that you have spoken about in the last 48 hours, and that's, of course, is the impending US rate hike. Janet Yellen is going to get impatient sometime sooner than most people expect her to. How do you think emerging markets are going to be impacted, particularly India? The first time Ben Bernanke spoke about taper, our markets had a huge tantrum. Do you believe we are better prepared, and what else can be done to avoid that kind of frenzy? There was that tantrum back in May, June 2013, and I think a lot was learned from that moment, which was painful for some emerging market economies that saw a lot of capital outflows and significant movements both in terms of interest rates and currency variations. So a lot was learned by both the advanced economies, better communication, better cooperation amongst central bankers, but a lot was learned by the emerging market economies too. And we saw very quickly that the strongest one fared much better, that tantrum and the consequences of the hint of a possible monetary policy change. And third, I think the central bankers have also expanded their toolbox in order to respond to a potential spillover effects of a change of monetary policy. So I think the world is in a better place. Is that to say that there will not be volatility? No, there will be volatility, but I think everybody is better equipped to deal with it, and the markets have probably also priced in some of that. Fair point indeed. You've also been on court to say that it's after a while that advanced economies are finally seeing better news. In fact, you've gone on to say they're seeing good news. Is the US seeing really good news? Equity markets have been very buoyant, but are we seeing a real turnaround of sorts as far as macroeconomic fundamentals are concerned? I first want to address the US before I go to the Eurozone. I have one strong indicator, which is also a very strong concern, and that is employment and unemployment. And when you look at the US numbers, the unemployment numbers have improved significantly, and the unemployment rate has moved down a lot. The participation rate is improving also gradually. The creation of jobs is surprisingly high and has been for a long period of time. So that's an indication that the economy is rebounding, and that recovery is for real and not just a market mirage. So it is going to be affected by the currency variations, and the fact that the dollar has significantly appreciated in a short period of time will have an impact on economic numbers. But the US economy is a relatively closed economy, which trades with itself in many ways, which invests with itself as well, and the consequences should not be particularly alarming on that front. So while you believe the US is going to rebound and signs are real, what about the Eurozone? Do you see the Eurozone turning a corner, and what in the Eurozone bothers you right now? Well, the Eurozone is having the benefit of three factors. One, oil price decline, just like India, except a bit less. Second, a depreciation of its currency, because the euro has depreciated quite significantly in any way or shape you measure it. And third, still extremely low financing cost. When you look at the spread and the yields in that zone of the world, it is still extremely cheap. So with these three factors, plus some structural reforms having been at least started in some countries and announced in others, we are beginning to see some better numbers than what we have seen in the last few years. So yes, it's a bit more promising.
Are there geopolitical risks that bother you?
There are always geopolitical risks around the world, but we do have those risks currently in this sort of very large Middle East and North African region of the world, which goes from Afghanistan all the way down to Mali, and that's a very insidious and very uncertain risks in terms of development and depth. We're also seeing risks on the borders of Ukraine and Russia, with fortunately some stability and a truce agreement which seems to be respected over there. And there is always a bit of instability as a result of the discussions between Greece and its Euro partners.
That's right.
Which brings about the question as to whether or not that eurozone is stable for good, which I think it is.
I have one question to ask you on fiscal austerity before I move on to gender, because that's something I really want to discuss with you. A lot of people assert that the fiscal austerity measures that one is seeing, particularly in regions like the eurozone, are actually recipes for economic decimation of sorts. The question that I would want to ask the IMF chief is there any getting away from that? Is that a reality we've got to live with?
When a country generates deficit of something like 15%, which was the case of Greece, or 10%, which was the case of the UK, there are not many alternatives. You have to take measures to deal with it, because you cannot constantly borrow your future out of those financial balance sheets and numbers. So you have to use a combination of things. But it includes inevitably some fiscal measures, the indication of fiscal discipline, structural reforms when necessary concerning the product and service markets and the labor markets for some of those countries. And it has been efficient in many, many instances, whether you look at Ireland, whether you look at the UK, which has taken its own measures by itself, or whether you look at Iceland, or whether you look at a country like Spain that has been very hard at taking those measures, starting from a difficult base. So those are, in a way, inevitable, but they need to be taken over the course of time in order not to hamper and constitute such a brake on growth that you actually are very counterproductive, and the austerity decisions that you make are growth hostile rather than being growth friendly, which they may well be.
Fair point indeed. I'll ask you to wear your other hat, in which of course is a very successful woman, one of the most successful women in the world, and talk about an issue that's close to your heart that you've been championing for a while, which is gender. You believe there is a corporate conspiracy of sorts the world over against women, and having more women in the workforce is going to make an actual difference to the GDP. For all the men out there who try to run our lives, let me hear that from you. Why do you believe so?
Because we've studied it, and because there is empirical evidence and completely concordant analysis that lead to those two conclusions. Now, the first one is not a corporate conspiracy; it's what I've called an insidious conspiracy against women being integrated in the economy. And we have studied about 150 countries, and in 90% of the cases, whether they are advanced economies, emerging markets, developing countries, we find everywhere discrimination that are embodied in either the constitution or the law that play against women and prevent them or act against them when they want to either join the job market, start a business, and dispose of their assets.
That's right.
So that's what I've called the insidious conspiracy against women. The second finding is that clearly when women can contribute to the economy, in the same proportion as men, they increase growth, they create value, they develop job, and whether they are self-employed or in a salaried an employee's position, they do contribute to the economy. And it's a stupid thing to prevent them from choosing to do it.
It's sad that women who do the same job are paid only 77% of what men are paid, and that's of course studies that prove that. I have a more personal question to ask of you. Do you believe at one level women find it very difficult to celebrate their own success? There is this sense of guilt, and is that inborn? Is that what society brings on you? Is that what men make you believe? Because there is this sense of guilt when it comes to a woman's own success being celebrated. You almost want to shy away from it.
I think it's a very personal question, but I think, you know, I've felt very guilty on occasions when I had to find that, you know, impossible balance between work and life, between maternity and productivity, between competition and compassion, and I've dealt with it. You know, my children are grown up enough to have their own life, to be adults, and to be totally reconciled with the fact that on occasions I have missed the football match. On occasions, I have not attended the parents' meeting. On occasions, I was delinquent. But they've told me over and over, it was okay, Mom. You shouldn't have worried about it. We managed our way out of that, and then you should not have felt guilty. So if I can be of any use to all those young women who are feeling guilty about that, forget about the guilt.
Don't even think about it. I have a more personal question to ask of you. You thought this was first time. I'm going to get a little more personal now. Have there been times in your career, and your career spans many, many years, and you've worn many hats, you've been in public life for a very long time. Have there been times in your career when you've been so caught up between, you know, work and home that you just thought, my God, this is not worth it, let me just give it up? What kept you going at that time? Very often, young women, the daughters of my friends, and the determination to not give up. I think that, you know, when you decide to do something, you have to try. You have to give it your best. You shouldn't give up. Or if you do, you have to really analyze the situation, really take time, sleep over it, and then make up your mind and go. And there are circumstances when, you know, you don't want to work for horrible people, you don't want to waste your time, and sometimes you do give up. But unless it is in those circumstances, one should not give up. Is there a thing like, you know, recharging, rebooting for the IMF Chief Christine Lagarde? Is there something like switching off and then recharging your batteries to switch on? Or is this 24/7 and you're always working in your mind, even if you're not at your desk? I take cat naps very often. I have one final question to ask you. You've spoken very passionately about the IMF quota reforms, and you say there's a sense of frustration why some of that isn't coming along. On a more personal note, and because you're in India, I'm going to ask you this question. Do you believe it is finally time that somebody from the emerging markets could be leading the IMF, and the very own Raghuram Rajan could be one such possible candidate? Well, look, for the moment, I'm leading it, and I have no intention to step down. So, you know, that will be for another time. But I'm sure one day it will happen, of course. You believe the quota reforms is a restriction to that, and you would want those? No, I think the quota reform is totally independent from that. And I am frustrated that the quota reform is not implemented, and more to the point that the governance reform is not implemented. That's right. I think in terms of quota, we have the financials, we have the ability to deal with crisis, but the governance is something that should change, and that should bring all the underrepresented countries to the level where they should be represented. That includes many emerging market economies that should have a bigger voice at the table. And I hope it is implemented, and I hope all members, including the United States of America, will actually deliver on the promise to ratify this reform. For now, the IMF is in very safe hands, but do you see Raghuram Rajan at the head of it sometime in the future? The RBI is in very safe hands at the moment, but he has a very promising future, and I don't know where his destiny will take him. I hope it's for the benefit of India ever. Ms. Lagarde, it's a pleasure talking to you. Pleasure for me too. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.